Hello everybody and welcome back to the final video in my series looking at the recent Batman animated series wave from McFarlane Toys. Now this has been the third wave of the classic Batman animated series figures from McFarlane Toys. As we know, these have been largely recycled from the DC Collectibles line from a good 10-15 years ago. However, McFarlane Toys have been adding value by adding some new characters to the line that have never been produced before in the DC Collectibles line, and they're typically doing this as Build-A-Figures, and the Build-A-Figure this time around is none other than Maxie Zeus. A relatively minor character, but nonetheless quite an impressive one in the animated series. So long overdue and quite an interesting choice. Now, if we start off by taking a look at the head sculpt, of course, everything about this figure is brand new. There's nothing recycled here. This is unique and bespoke to the animated series, to this version of Maxie Zeus. And I think, that deserves commendation. And Zeus, much like the other Build-A-Figures we've had so far, is slightly larger than the standard 6 inches. He stands about 7 inches tall, so he towers above your other figures by about an inch or so, which is great. That's perfectly in scale with this line, and I think they've done a really good job when it comes to the sculpting as well. If we look at this head sculpt here, I think they've caught the animated series style pretty much bang on. This looks like it fits right in alongside the other figures. It looks perfectly appropriate, and I think they've done a good job. Now, there's not much in the way of paint taps, but what is here works well and is clear and is well defined, and there's no smudging, so that's definitely a huge bonus. Likewise, the body sculpting is really well done. What we see a lot less of here, though, are paint taps. There's actually nothing running through this, and that's kind of strange given that the whole thing of these re-releases is that they actually have cell shading. This character doesn't have anything going on like that. Now, that's not necessarily a negative against the figure, but it is kind of strange given that the others, it doesn't fit in with the other figures in this collection, or indeed even in this wave, which is strange. And I think it's a misfire because this figure really needs something like that to draw out the detail. There's a lot of bland colours here, skin tones and whites and things like that, so there's not an awful lot to draw the eye, and I feel like they just needed a little bit of a wash in certain areas, particularly around the gauntlets and maybe over the sash, just to highlight a little bit of detail here. Now, one thing I did want to note is that I found mine actually quite difficult to assemble around the middle, in the centre of the torso there. It's on a big block peg, and mine didn't quite go in all the way, so you actually see there's a little bit of a gap there in the waist, which is a little bit unsightly, and I found this quite difficult, particularly with that toga sash there. It kind of blocks it a little bit and doesn't make it quite a smooth, seamless finish, which is disappointing. Once again, around the legs, we can see there's actually some nice paint apps here in terms of the sandals. They're very smooth. There's no blaring or smudging there, which I think is really good. So I think they've done a good job of this. And pleasingly, he actually has a wide enough surface area to be able to support this figure, because he is definitely top heavy. There's no two ways about that. But he doesn't have any issues with his balance, and that seems to work quite well. So I'm pleased about that. Articulation-wise, he does have a ball joint at the top of the neck, so he can spin his head all the way around, and he can kind of wobble it up and down a little bit. Not much, a bit disappointing in truth, but that's pretty consistent for this line, I suppose. He does have a nice healthy ball joint in the top of the shoulder there, so that arm can lift up and out. He has the standard pin swivel at the elbow there, so that lower forearm can spin all the way around, and of course it can hinge to about 90 degrees, maybe more like 45 degrees there. He has another pin swivel at the wrist, of course that rotates all the way around, and it hinges forwards and backwards. Sadly, there's no articulation in the waist, but he does have a hinge at the hips, and surprisingly, he can kick his legs out a good distance, which is great despite that toga, and he can kind of kick his legs forwards and backwards a little bit, but it is much more restrictive here. He can bend his knee to about 90 degrees, and then he's got another pivot at the ankle, so the foot will hinge forwards and backwards and rock from side to side. Surprisingly, McFarlane Toys went to the effort of actually creating some accessories for this figure as well, including one pair of additional hands, so one gripping hand and one more open palm hand. And he also has a lightning bolt. And I have to say, it's actually quite a thick accessory, this one. Quite a solid piece of plastic, which is really helpful, but it does make it a little bit tricky to get into his grip. I had to really persevere with this, and there were points where I thought, I might be in danger of snapping this. So be careful with this one, but I have to say, the result is well worth it if you persevere, because this looks pretty cool, and he makes for quite an interesting display piece as a figure, actually. He's quite overbearing, which is kind of cool, and a little bit different to anything else in the collection. So for me, I'm going to give this figure 3 stars again, and that's been pretty much par for the course for most of this wave. I was most impressed by the Lightning Strike Batman. The rest have just been a kind of middling, really, and part of that I think is because these figures feel a little bit out of date now in terms of articulation, but I'll always have a soft spot for this collection. I really like it. I like collecting it back in the day, and I love the animated series, and I think they do a really good job of representing that. And one of the things I really like about this Redux line from McFarlane Toys is that we're managing to plug those gaps in our collection with some of these more obscure characters like Maxie Zeus or the Condiment King that we never had first time around. And I think Maxie Zeus is a very welcome addition to that line. He's not particularly exciting in and of himself, but I think he's a worthwhile addition, and I think his articulation is good enough. I think his accessories are pretty fun, and overall he makes a nice presentation, but there's nothing particularly special about him. I can't say he's worth buying the entire wave just to build. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching this long. If you did enjoy it, please do give it a like. It really helps the channel out. And if you're interested in more videos like this, please subscribe. I'll have plenty more content soon.